Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book that you can see in front of you, Modifying the Aerodynamics of Your Road Car. What I want to do in today's video is talk about setting wing angles. How do you set the angle of the wing to give you best downforce, or if you're after it also, best downforce and lowest drag? Here's an example of a aerofoil profile of a wing. This is an aluminium extrusion, which is actually sold for use as wind turbine blades, but it makes an excellent small wing for a car. We can see it's got that characteristic aerodynamic profile shape, and here are some more different shapes. These are covered in my book, and each of these profiles is quite good for use as a low drag wing, for example, on a road car where you actually do want to develop some downforce. Let's have a look at the nomenclature, the names that are used to describe different characteristics of wings, because this is important if you're to understand what I'll be talking about in a moment. Now, let's start off with the chord line. The chord line is a line that joins the leading edge of the wing with the trailing edge of the wing, and that's that line there. It's important because the angle of attack of the wing is defined as the angle between the chord line and the angle of the oncoming airflow. Now in this case, in this diagram, the oncoming airflow is shown as horizontal, so the angle of attack is the angle between the chord line and horizontal. But in the real world on a car, the direction of airflow is almost certain not to be horizontal. And so if you set the wing's angle of attack versus horizontal, as I think most people do, you'll find the actual angle of attack is all wrong. Let's have a look at what I mean. Here are some examples. I've got three slides now that show different Mercedes-Benz models in a wind tunnel, and the reason I'm showing them to you is we can see very much what the direction of airflow is towards the rear of the car on these different shapes. So here we've got attached flow across the roof. It separates at the trailing edge of the roof, and if we were to put a wing here, we would certainly be in clean airflow, but notice how the airflow is angled slightly downwards. Therefore, the angle of the wing, even on a car like this, should not be set against horizontal, but should be set against the actual angle of the oncoming airflow. It's dipping a little bit below horizontal. If we look at another one, an older model, we can see two things. Firstly, if we were to have a wing back here, right down low, it would do nothing. So this also shows us the wing would have to be very high to be in that clean airflow. And again, we can see that the angle of the airflow is dipping below horizontal. It isn't horizontal. It's just, again, a little bit below horizontal. Whereas on this one, if we follow the airflow direction, we can see it is dipping substantially below horizontal. It's coming in at something like 30 degrees already before we start calculating any angle of the wing. So you can see if we set the angle of the wing against horizontal, a nice big angle of attack, you can see that the wing would be stalled because the airflow would be approaching it almost at right angles. So this is a good example where the angle that the wing has to be set needs to match the actual airflow direction and not match horizontal, as we might imagine the airflow is approaching the wing. All right, it's all a bit complicated, but it's also a very important background to understand. So how do we set angles of wing to give best results? Well, by far the best approach, in my opinion, is to actually measure real suspension ride height. So this is a ride height sensor. It's actually been taken from a Range Rover. It's being used on the front suspension of one of my cars, but the same approach can be used on the back. It just acts as a potentiometer, so we can just feed it a 5-volt regulated signal, or a 5-volt supply, and then take its signal and feed it into, say, a digital dashboard. We can rescale the units, we can smooth it, and then we can display actual ride height on, say, a digital programmable dash. And then we simply adjust the wing angle until we've got the real world measured reduction in ride height that's indicative of actually creating downforce. Incidentally, if you don't have a digital logging dash, you can just take the output of this sensor, use some simple components to smooth its output, feed it into a multimeter, and you can measure real world ride height for very low cost indeed. So the best way of actually setting a wing angle is to take into account what's actually happening with ride height, because of course that will show you lift and downforce that are really occurring on the road or on the track. But there is another way. This is a very tricky way. What we've got here is a miniature pitot tube. Now, a pitot tube measures air speed, and these tiny ones are sold for use on model aircraft. They're quite cheap, they're quite readily available on eBay. Now, why would we want to measure speed? There's two things to keep in mind. Firstly, a pitot tube will give you the maximum speed reading when it is pointing directly into the oncoming airflow. So if this is the oncoming airflow coming down, the pitot tube, whatever angle it's at, you can work out what the approaching angle of the airflow actually is, because when it's pointing straight into the airflow, it will have the highest measured speed reading. As it points away from the airflow, the actual speed reading will drop. So by mounting a pitot tube like this on the back of a car, just on an upright little piece of wood or whatever it might be, and then changing the angle of the pitot tube, we can get quite an accurate indication of the direction of oncoming airflow, because when it's pointing straight into that oncoming airflow, its reading will be highest. How do you read it? Well, you can connect that pitot tube straight to one of these, a magnehelic gauge, sold for use in the air conditioning industry primarily. Quite cheap, these gauges on eBay these days. It has a high pressure port and a low pressure port, and so those two ports of the pitot tube connect straight to the magnehelic gauge. If the gauge moves in the wrong direction, just swap the connections. The other use for the pitot tube, in addition to finding the angle of oncoming airflow, is you can also use it to measure speed of airflow. And if you've got something like a sedan, a 3-box car, you can see here that as you get higher above the boot lid, above the trunk lid, the airflow speed increases until you get to a certain point where you, in this case, you're nearly at 80% of the free stream velocity, and going higher with a wing wouldn't be of much use. But here is a good height. In this case, you can see it's 200 millimeters above the boot lid in this particular car, and as you get closer to the boot lid, the speed of the airflow drops away very, very fast. This is a percentage of the free stream velocity. The free stream velocity is simply how fast the car is moving forward on a still day. So in addition to using the pitot tube to work out what angle the airflow is approaching where your wing will be, you can also work out how high above the bodywork, the rear bodywork of the car, the wing should be positioned so that it's in good airflow. Now, does it all actually work? You betcha it does. So this is the aluminium wing we saw earlier, the extrusion mounted on one of my cars, my Honda Insight, and you can see what looks to be an absurd wing angle. Now, the reason that it looks absurd is because the angle of attack has actually been set against the oncoming airflow direction, and on the Honda the airflow stays attached all the way down this boot lid or this hatch lid, and so the airflow is coming downwards at quite a steep angle. In fact, these side plates, that's horizontal, believe it or not, and so you can see that the angle of the airflow is way below horizontal. Now, when I started setting the angle of attack on this wing, I did it arbitrarily. I did it like everyone else would, and I had the angle of attack much steeper. The rear edge of the wing was much higher, and it looked really like everyone else's wings. But I was also measuring ride height. I have ride height sensors in this car, and I could see that it was doing nothing to decrease ride height. In other words, it was not developing any downforce at all. And then as I changed the angle of attack, I began to be able to see it was developing downforce. And of course, when you correlate that angle of attack with the actual angle of oncoming airflow, it matches the aerodynamic data for this wing profile quite well. It's what you would expect, isn't it, if the airflow is not coming in horizontally. Really important, I think, if you're playing with wings, to do some of the testing that I've been talking about here, and primarily to realize that the airflow oncoming direction is very unlikely to be horizontal, as many people, I think, assume it is. You'll find out all about this in this book, Modifying the Aerodynamics of Your Road Car. I cover the setting of wing angles, I cover the different types of wing profiles that are likely to be effective on a road car, where you want to have low drag as well as have the downforce that it's created. I talk about the pitot tube. I talk about smoke testing to show the oncoming angle of airflow, all in the book, and I recommend it to you. Thank you.